Hello, Gay Hendricks. Welcome, welcome, welcome. I am so excited to have you on this training, on this show. And I just want to say thank you for taking the time before I tell people more officially who you are, although I'm sure a lot of these women know who you are.
Thank you. It's my pleasure to be with you, Sage.
So, for those of you that don't know Gay as well as I do, Gay Hendricks has been a leader in the fields of relationship transformation and body mind transformation for more than 45 years. He's earned his PhD from Stanford. He's served as the professor of counseling psychology at the University of Colorado for 21 years. Gay Hendricks has written more than 40 books. How is this even possible? Including bestsellers like Five Wishes, The Big Leap, Conscious Loving, and Conscious Loving Ever After. Of course, the last two are co-authored with his incredible mate of more than 35 years, Dr. Gay Hendricks, who I absolutely also adore. Gay has appeared on more than 500 radio and television shows, including Oprah, CNN, CNBC. The most recent book, The Genius Zone, changed my life. And it's such an honor to be with you, Gay. We're serving hundreds of thousands of women entrepreneurs all over the globe at this kind of important moment in history. And I know so many of us are asking the question, how do we get a message out without it eating us alive, especially in this time of such uncertainty on the planet? When I first heard you talk about the genius zone and being in the genius zone, and that all of us have this intention likely to spend more of our time in our genius zone. And you were sharing at that moment that you spent an increasing amount of time doing exactly what you loved. Just, can you share a little bit more about that? And how did you get to be so amazing?
Well, thank you. Well, first of all, you mentioned Katie and I have been together for 35 years. We've actually been together now for 42 years. So, yeah, we're coming up on our 42nd anniversary here very soon. And she deserves great credit for everything I'm going to say because we develop all of our ideas together. We're completely unified in that regard, and we've been working and thinking together for more than half my life now. So it's really an amazing, inspiring thing to have a close relationship where you not only live with the person but you work with the person. It's kind of like the major leagues of relationship, I think.
It's been a life changer to learn from both of you, both together and apart. And I think you guys are such an incredible model of two humans who have leaned into each enough that 1 + 1 = infinity. And you've worked through what I'm sure the inevitable kinks that come up to the point of just really changing the world as unified leaders.
Yes, and it's been delightful ride the whole time. Doing things like the first time I was invited on Oprah, they only wanted to take one of us, but we insisted that no, wait a minute, this is a relationship book. We want to have both people on the stage at the same time, modeling it, not just talking about it. And they had some resistance to that, but we eventually got our way. And so it's been really fantastic to be able to do a lot of those things in public with my partner on stage with me. And but back to your original question about the Genius Zone, I first started noticing back in the 1980s. I started noticing this thing that in the Big Leap I call the upper limit problem, which is the tendency to sabotage ourselves when things start going better. We don't know how to enjoy things going better, or we don't have a structure for handling more money or more love in our lives. And so when we get it, we come up with some way of sabotaging ourselves. So that's the upper limit problem. And I started noticing that in my own life and people I worked with. I was working at the time with a lot of very brilliant high-tech executives many of them were so brilliant in their minds, but completely out of touch on the emotional level. It was like they existed from the neck up and didn't really know how to deal when they had anxiety come up, or anger, or sadness, or when their partners, when their wives, when their partners would have emotional stuff. They just didn't know how to deal with it. And so I started doing a lot of work with really brilliant people in especially in the high tech world. And I came up with this idea of the genius zone because I saw that the ones that were thriving were the ones that were doing what they most loved to do. They were just engaged with something they were passionate about. And I started thinking about that, and I started thinking, what am I passionate about? I was looking into my own upper limits at the time, and I hadn't really figured out what I wanted to do with my whole creative side of my life. But suddenly, when I saw this in action, I realized I want to dedicate my life to my own genius zone, but also helping other people get into their genius zones too. So I always say I'm my own best customer, because as soon as I got that idea firmly rooted in my mind, I started kind of assessing my daily life. How much time today did I spend in my genius zone doing what I most love to do? And at the beginning, it was terrible, Sage, because I only came up with about 10% of the time. And here I am trying to help these people get more into their genius zone, and I'm not even doing mine all the time. So I started figuring out more about my genius, and I figured out that the thing I am really good at is I'm really good at explaining really complicated things in a very simple way so that people can get it. And so once I homed in on making that my life work, then, like I wake up spontaneously every morning at 4:30. I go to sleep at 10 o'clock at night, and just like clockwork, I wake up at 4:30. And so for the first few hours of the morning, I dedicate myself to my creative genius. And I do my writing then. My wife likes to sleep in. Katie likes to wake up around 7:30 or 8 o'clock. And so the first few hours of the day, it's just me and two British short-haired cats. And so we're sitting there all huddled together working, and they're on one side of me and the other's on the other side of me. And so there I am in my little creative cocoon working for the first few hours of the day. And so I spend as much time as I possibly can doing what I most love to do. And I started doing that back in the 80s, and it took me to the end of the century to get so I was doing it 100% of the time. But hey, what are you going to spend your time doing that's any better than increasing your genius every day? Because your genius is what's going to allow you to receive more love and receive more positive energy, receive more money. That's where it all comes from. You have to have a structure underneath you that allows you to grow every day. And so that's what the books, The Genius Zone and The Big Leap are really getting at.
This concept changed my life, and I started to see how I was sabotaging myself. And when I read The Big Leap, I started to understand, oh my gosh, I'm perpetuating some of my own problems. And I realized that I was micromanaging in my business. I wasn't trusting my team enough. And then I was complaining that I was having to do all these things that I didn't want to do. I started this business so I could be a speaker. I started this business so that I could train and inspire people. And now I'm managing people. And then I realized, the goal is to actually not be managing. The goal is to be speaking and training. And I was forced, Gay, to let go of big pieces of the business and hire people and train people and trust people. And I am proud to say I've been spending more and more time in my genius zone. And what I've found is that when I spend more time in my genius zone, I am more on fire and willing to do some of the things that I have to do or that don't feel as much as my genius. And have you found that? And what do we do if we're not spending enough time in our genius zone and it's hard for us to see a path toward more time in the genius zone?
Well, that's nature's way of telling you that you need to do a deeper dive into finding out what your genius really is. Because the moment you connect with it, you'll know it, you'll feel it, and it has an inspirational quality from within that it sort of takes care of that problem that you're referring to. So anytime you're hitting resistance in the outer realm, take that magic trip down inside and say, why would I be creating resistance right now? What am I trying to express right now that's so important that I'm bringing up fear about it? Go down into those deeper questions. That's where the solution is.
I'm just having aha moments over here. Like, thank you for saying that, because I feel like just in talking to you that my genius is bigger than just speaking and training and leading women entrepreneurs. There's a genius that I can bring to management. There's a genius I can bring to team meetings. And when I do, I like leading them more.
Yes, that's really, really good point because, well, I learned that kind of the hard way. I used to be, up until 1995, I was a professor at the University of Colorado for 21 years. I was chairman of the counseling psychology department there at the university in Colorado Springs. And so I'm terrible at management too, but I kept getting promoted up and up and up until there wasn't any further for me to go, and I kept telling them, look, I love to teach, I love to work with students, but they kept adding on more committees and stuff like that. And it finally kind of began to choke the life out of me. And so that I left long before I could have retired or anything, just because I wanted to set up my own institute where I could make the rules. And, like for 21 years, I was always saying, why do we make counselors and therapists take a 500 question multiple choice test? Does that really have anything to do? And why did my group of 25 graduate student counselors and therapists have to take a year of statistics? They're never going to use it, unless they go into research, and none of them ever did. They all wanted to go into private practice. So anyway, I was just a thorn in the university's side all the time. So I finally said, okay, I'm going to set up my own university. And so the Hendricks Institute has been now thriving for, more than 30 years, I guess. And we've never given a multiple choice test, and we've never taught a statistics course. We only teach the things you really need to know to change people's lives.
And I've learned so many of my consciousness strategies, my leadership strategies, the strategies that are like more of the come from place inside of me from you and Katie. And, I've learned to walk through my fear, and I've learned how to keep moving through my upper limits and notice when I am upper limiting. And I'm so grateful. And I know some of the women who are listening might not have really explored the concept of upper limits. Can you talk a little bit more about how we identify those and what might be happening if we're bumping up against them, and how we keep rising through?
Well, first of all, let me say that entrepreneurs are God's gift to the world, in my opinion. That if anything is going to save us, change us, make lives better on earth, it's entrepreneurs. And I have the pleasure of speaking to many entrepreneur groups. In fact, this year I've probably spoken to more women entrepreneur groups than I've spoken to just general all-purpose entrepreneur groups. And so I want to salute women entrepreneurs, because I think it's an ideal thing for women to do. And it also, it has its scary parts, and we need to acknowledge that, So, but I think women are really incredibly well disposed toward being entrepreneurs, because if you can do things like have a baby, you can run a business. I'll tell you, my wife, Katie, is the most amazingly loving woman you've ever met in your life. And she's also incredibly clear thinking, and I've often said, Katie, I'd like to parachute you into the Oval Office today and have you run this country for a while, because everything would work. Nobody would hassle anybody else. Everything would work, because that's the way she does her life. And what I discovered was I had to look into my own upper limit problem a lot to help me work with other people's upper limit. And so I discovered something about the upper limit problem. First of all, let me describe some typical upper limit behaviors. Things are going along great, and then you get a cold. Things are going along great, and then you have a trip and fall. These are two that I just heard of in the past 2 days, by the way, including a very well known person who consulted me about being on top of the world and then having a trip and fall and having his face all beat up and everything, and he's on TV, and so anyway, that's a typical upper limit problem, but they get even more subtle. Worry thoughts are probably the number one upper limit problem. You're feeling real good, and then all of a sudden you thought, oh, my daughter-in-law Tabitha is going through a hard time. What's going to happen with her? What's Tabitha going to do? And you start obsessing about something that you have no control over. There's no payoff to worrying about Tabitha because it's not going to improve her situation. It might if you called her and said, "Hey, Tabitha, I was just thinking of you." That might make her feel good. But worry thoughts about Tabitha are of zero usefulness, except they bum you out, and they're useful as an upper limit problem. So many of us, we have 3 seconds of feeling good, and then we think about all the terrible things that would happen if we kept on feeling that way.
Oh my gosh. It's so true. It was like I grew up being trained to worry by everybody around me. And it's taken years to catch myself like, oh, there's nothing productive that's going to come from worrying about that, especially right now. And it's almost like I have to train myself to let everything be okay.
It is a training issue. I appreciate you bringing that up, Sage, because a lot of people don't think about it as something they need to practice. But to me, feeling a flow of positive energy inside me and a flow of positive energy or love or whatever you want to call it, connection with the people I'm close to me, that's what I want to experience every moment of my life. And it's available to us. If, like I say, if you can feel good for 10 seconds, you can feel good all day long because all you need to do is start eliminating the barriers to whatever is in the way of you feeling 11 seconds or 15 seconds or 20 seconds. And that's the way you have to do it. Like when Katie and I first got together 42 years ago, we had a lot of the same old problems as everybody else. We criticized each other and we'd get into arguments. And we realized we had about a 3-day limit on how good things could go in our relationship. And then one of us would start criticizing the other one, or somebody would break an agreement or show up late, or, and get into a hassle. But we realized it's not the argument isn't the important thing. It's the fact that we broke up a flow of positive energy by doing something. And we started noticing all those somethings we did. And we started extending the period of time we felt good in our relationship. And you know what? We've felt that entirely this century. We eliminated all the little barriers back in 1980s and 1990s. And so for this century, like we've owned this house now for since 2001, so a little over 20 years. And neither one of us have ever said a critical word to the other one in this house. So for 21 years, imagine for living for 21 years in a relationship without any hassles. What happens is you allow more and more energy to go into your creative experiences, expressions. And so now, for the last 20 years, we've been able to basically do nothing but what we love to do in an unbroken state of positive energy. So you ask, how did I get 40 books written? Well, that's how, because if you're not spending all your time recuperating from various hassles, arguments, criticisms,
Wow.
yada, yada, you've got a
Wow.
lot of creative time.
Yeah. I think there's a few gems in what you just shared, Gay. And I'm just over here grinning because, first of all, I find that when I and my clients clear the negative energy from their lives, their businesses go so much better because they can put their creative energy into their business without these hiccups or somebody criticizing them. And it is so essential to have like a clean and loving launch pad. And the other thing that I'm hearing you say is that in order to shift out of some of the worry thinking that I get caught in, one of the things I really love to celebrate and focus on is how can I just share more love with the people I'm working with my incredible partner in life, who I'm creating a love relationship with. And it's like, I need something to focus on instead of the worry.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Well, focus on cultivating the flow of positive energy in your body and cultivating the flow of connection with other people. That's the thing to be focusing on at all times. And let me say another word about the upper limit problem. My big discovery about the upper limit problem, well, one of them was that they're all driven by fear. And those fears can be named. And I've worked with I don't know how many thousands of entrepreneurs all over the world now, from Europe, Asia, wherever I touch down, and they all have the same 4 or 5 fears. And when I name them off, I want you to just take it, have I ever experienced something like that? Because those fears come up and they cause us to trip the upper limit switch. So one big fear that I've noticed that a lot of women entrepreneurs have, and that is what I call the fear of outshining, the fear of really, being as much as you are. Katie calls it breaking through the too much problem, because she remembers being told as a kid, don't be too smart. You'll never get the boys interested in you. Don't be too much. Keep your head down in the pack. Fortunately, she didn't listen to that. She was kind of a rebel at an early age. When she went to the first grade, she already knew how to read. And so she sat around for a couple of hours and then walked out the back door unbeknownst to her teacher and walked home back to her mother's house or to her parents' house. And her mother said, what are you doing here?
What are you doing?
Katie says, those other kids don't know how to read. and so I came home. So unfortunately, Katie's mom had to put her back into jail again. But we all have to get used to being enclosed in those kind of boxes. But what happens is, I think a lot of women especially are told not to let their light shine all the way for whatever reason. And so if you've ever limited shining your light based on any kind of fear or input like that, please know that I'm a cheerleader for you shining your light to the max. And it's none of your business how other people react to it. It is not your business. That's their business. Your job is to go all the way with your genius and to go all the way with your expression in the world and let it shine. The second big fear that so many people carry around, I've noticed this. I used to work with juvenile delinquents early in my career, and now I work with, rock stars and movie actors and folks like that, and they all have this same problem, this same fear. And that many of them suffer from the fear that they're fundamentally flawed in some way, that they're not the right color or not the right gender or not the right something or not smart enough. And, I was thinking of this before our conversation today. We used to live over at the beach 20 years ago, and I'd always had this dream of living right on the ocean, where I could walk out onto the sand. And so after many, many years, we finally manifested our beach place, and I'd forgotten to think about 2 things. One is I had to wear a sweater like 358 days a year, because it was foggy right there on the ocean. And the second thing I had never considered is burglar alarms on people's cars, that at the beach they go off about every hour or so because somebody bumps somebody's car. And so it was insane because I have kind of I like to write when it's quiet, and that's why I love to get up at 4:30 in the morning because it's just totally quiet. So, but anyway, we finally, after our dream came true, that that Mark Twain thing about there's only one thing worse than getting what you want. Than not getting what you want is getting what you want. And
right.
So I think in life you're always going to have to be shifting to bigger and better visions. You think one thing is the biggest vision and then you do it, and then there's some kind of little thing you don't like about it, and then you expand to something bigger. So we took that as a sign that we should expand our vision of what we wanted to live, how we wanted to live. And so that's how we ended up with our current, we found our dream house here in Ojai after, years of looking, and have really enjoyed this for the past 20 plus years. So my advice to people is to let go of that notion that there's something fundamentally flawed about you. Now, the reason I mentioned the beach house is because one of my neighbors was a pop star who was about to get his handprints in the Hollywood Walk of Fame down there, and he called me up and he said he was having a panic attack. Could he come over? And so he came over, and you know what the panic attack was about? It had unearthed this fear of being fundamentally flawed.
Wow.
And he thought he was worthless. I don't deserve this. Now they want me to put my handprints in the concrete right next to whoever was next door, John Wayne or somebody. And so anyway, even the rich and famous drag this issue around.
I'm so glad you said that, because I think it's so easy for us to think, oh, there's all these people on the planet that have gotten past this issue. Why do I still feel like I'm broken or flawed or like there's something wrong with me? And thank you for just being honest that no matter how much success we achieve, there's still that opportunity to accept and keep moving through the fears. Okay, so fear of outshining, fear of being fundamentally flawed. What's the next one?
Fear of being disloyal to people that you may have grown beyond in your life.
Wow.
Fear of kind of leaving people behind that were once there for you and now have aspects to them that you don't like to be around anymore.
Wow.
Like a friend of mine I was talking to today, he got sober 17 years ago. And he said one of the hardest things was to let go of the relationships he had with people who were still drinking and or trying to kind of coerce him into not getting sober. And so it was kind of had to let go of his loyalty to certain people in the service of his otherwise flourishing. And so I'm happy to say that here, 17 years later, he's has a new set of friends that support him for all the good things rather than the ones that were trying to, how crabs try to drag the crab back in the bucket. If it tries to go over the edge, the other crab gang up on it and pull it back in. Well, we've got there's a constant dealing with the crabs in the world.
Yeah. I'm so glad you shared that one. I think this one can sneak up on us because I think we get afraid at both ends. We get afraid that we're going to fail, but we also get afraid that we're going to get so successful that the people closest to us might not be able to relate to us. We end up on Oprah, and what if somebody that we love decides we're just too big for our britches? And I think this one can really be sneaky. So I'm so glad you named this, Gay, and just to help us orient toward continuing to build relationships with people that are loving us into all we can become.
It's a really important thing, especially in the world of entrepreneuring. You almost have to, as an entrepreneur, I found you have to make a commitment to daily growth, to kind of turning over things all the time. A friend of mine, Jurka Rusefi, was our CEO at Gaiam, and launched Gaia, a big company out of Boulder, Colorado. And Yurka once told me that he's in the merger and acquisitions business, and he had done like 300 different acquisitions in his long career. And he said that he always made a point of asking the entrepreneur that was selling the business to him why they had started the business in the first place and why they were now willing to sell it. And he said that almost always the answer was, I went into creating my own business so I would have more free time. And that once I got into it, I found that I didn't have any free time. And so that's the reason, if you're in the entrepreneuring world, you need to make sure you're doing something that you absolutely love to do, because we need that kind of deep commitment to our creative wellspring in order to keep flourishing. And if you're doing something that you only like 75% of, that was kind of my university career. I got so tired of just being at that 75% level. I wanted to spend all my time expressing my creative genius. And that's what I want for everyone in the world, because I know where the deep satisfaction in life comes from, and that's it.
Amen. And a woman. I'm absolutely so in agreement with you. And if you're not getting to do something you love, there's just no way you're going to want to keep building it and growing it. And, I have those days where I'm like, oh my gosh, I had no idea it was going to be like this to run this business. And then I connect with a client, I get on stage, I do an interview with Gay Hendricks, and I'm like, I love what I do. And, just for each and every one of us to keep being honest about that, let it fill us up. So what's the fourth fear? Did you say 4? Outshining, flawed,
Yep.
disloyal.
Yes. There's another one too that I want you to pay attention to as your entrepreneurial life goes on. And that's the fear of burden, that success will create burden.
Yeah.
And almost everybody has a story about somebody that launched something big and then committed suicide, or launched something big and then lost it all, or launched something big and had some other disaster. And we see things like the amazing man that created Zappos, is dead at 39 or whatever it was. And so a lot of people have a story in their head about the burden of success, the cost of success. And I think that causes people, unless you can be conscious about that, unless you can acknowledge that fear, what happens is when you start being more successful, you find ways to sabotage yourself because you're afraid of that burden. Mm-hmm. I've had, oh, wow, I don't know how many people at around age 40 come in and say, I created this business, or I went into law, or I went into medicine, to help people. And now I'm making my $500,000 a year doing it, and I don't have time anymore to do the stuff I really loved about it in the first place. And so and I've heard that story all over the world. And so the best way to prevent that is to keep honing in on what you most love to do and what makes the biggest contribution to other people, because those two things are part and parcel of genius. My definition of genius is when you're doing what you most love to do and is also making the biggest contribution to people. Now, that contribution doesn't need to be to millions of people. Like one of my early mentors, Abraham Maslow, said, it doesn't matter whether it's a genius soup or a genius symphony. The soup may only be for one person's consumption, but it evokes your genius. And around here, we also say at the Hendricks Institute, we say genius has the capacity to surprise you. Mm. So even though I've written, I don't know how many books now, 40 some, I think, or maybe even closer to 50 now, I also write mystery novels in my spare time, so I crank out a mystery every year too. So I've kind of lost count
How is
of
that
those.
even possible? I guess because you wake up at 4:30 in the morning every morning.
It's not only that I wake up excited to be alive about being able, having one more day on this planet to express my genius. And so the greatest gift any human beings can give themselves is to find out what your true genius is, the thing that you would do all day, even if you weren't getting paid for it, if you had some other way to, pay your rent and stuff. So that's what I'm looking for. What would I like to do all day, every day, even if I weren't getting paid for it? And what brings me the greatest satisfaction per time spent? That's another great question to ask yourself, because a lot of times, in my view, you mentioned something early on, Sage, which is really important. In the early days of an entrepreneur's career, they tend to do a bunch of things that are in their zones of incompetence and competence. They spend time doing things they're good at, but somebody else could do them just as well. Or they're doing things they're absolutely not good at, but they're making themselves do it because they don't think they can afford to hire it out. Do whatever you can to get out of those two zones, because
Yes.
the other two zones are the zone of excellence, where you're doing stuff you're good at and makes a contribution. Then that ultimate sweet spot of life, when you graduate into the genius zone and when you're doing what you love to do and what also makes a satisfying contribution to other people's lives. I always say I have the best inbox in town, because every day when I open my email, I get tons of email, especially from entrepreneurs, where they're thanking me for the role of the big leap in helping them, kind of go from 0 to 60, or go from 60 to 120, wherever they are in the process, getting that big leap to the next phase. And so I would write books like that all day long for nothing if I got that effect, if I had some other way to pay my bills. But so to me, genius, the beauty of it is it's intrinsically satisfying. When you're in the sweet spot of doing what you most love to do, you don't say, oh gosh, what time is it? Or, oh gosh, I want a hot dog. Those thoughts don't occur to you when you're in your genius, because you're in the full flow of that.
I'm so with you. I'm so grateful for you modeling. I mean, I think about all the decisions you've made in your life to continue to move toward this incredible relationship, this incredible contribution. And I think about that these are all just this string of choices. And as we wrap up today, I want to make sure people have a way to stay in touch with you. How do we learn more about what you do for those of us that are just being exposed to you for the first time? But as we wrap up, I also just want to hear, as we embark on this opportunity to be more and more and more in our zone of genius, what last piece of advice would you give women who are still figuring it out? They're still like, okay, well, Gay, that's great, but like, I have to start somewhere. I have to get up a website. I have to do some social media. I have to do some of this stuff so I can make some money and get some clients so I can hire that first team member, right? But just one last piece of advice to keep us hopeful that indeed we can keep moving toward this genius zone.
Yes. Well, some wise person a long time ago said that life is about bliss or lessons to be learned. So there's part of life where you've got lessons coming at you from all sorts of different directions. And the big piece of advice I would give to entrepreneurs, especially women entrepreneurs, is make a commitment to being open to learning every day of your life. Because a big problem in the entrepreneurial world is things happen so fast that people get anxious and scared and then start contracting away from their big vision, or contracting away to do things they have to do, they think, to make themselves feel less scared. But the solution there, go ahead, acknowledge your fear, but don't let it run you. Acknowledge it, name it, Oh, you might say, here I am again sitting in the middle of my fear of something being fundamentally flawed about me. And then just take 3 deep breaths and get back on the horse again. you know, and that's entrepreneurial life. So it's either bliss or lessons to be learned.
Thank you so much. I would just love to hear from you all as we're wrapping up this interview. If you're watching on video, let us know in the chat, what's the biggest fear that you're moving through and wanting to transform next? Is it outshining? Is it being fundamentally flawed? Is it feeling like you're going to be disloyal if you go to your next level of success? Is it feeling the burden of success? Which one is just the next one you want to keep moving through? These definitely cycle for me. It's not that we only have one, but which one is resonating with you the most? If you're on our podcast, head over into the Women Rocking Business Sisterhood group and let us know what you're working with. Let us know how Gay's interview has touched you. Gay, we're so grateful. And how do women stay in touch with you and maybe learn more from you or you and Katie?
Yes, well, the big place to go to is hendricks.com, Hendricks.com. And we also have a really thriving nonprofit foundation called the Foundation for Conscious Living. And that has a lot of free resources in it for relationships and body-mind work. And so we'd be delighted to have you drop by and check out what we're up to. And I wanted to also thank you, Sage, for living in your genius zone, because look at how many people are getting a taste of their genius because of that. So thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thank you, Gay, for seeing me, for always being a champion of the women's work. I just want to wrap up by saying to every single one of you, I actually had one of my team members ask this morning, how do you have time to do a podcast today? We have such a big launch coming up. And I said, how do I not have time to? This is what I'm looking forward to the most. And I just want to remind every single one of you, no matter what's going on in your business, no matter what's happening as you're getting it off the ground, to take time to listen to things that inspire you, plug into the communities that inspire you, and to do the things that you know are going to light you up, because it makes everything else easier. And Gay, I'm just so grateful for you taking the time to be here today. Thank you for all the work you've done on your heart to be such a heartful man. I'm going to get a little vulnerable as I say that, but I've always felt you as a man who just champions women. And thank you so much. I think one of the reasons why I'm in such a healthy, thriving relationship in my life is because you and Katie modeled that for me. Just bowing down to you and the gifts that you share on the planet.
Thank you so much. That's deeply touching to me. That's what I'm here for. And blessings and much love to you.
Every single one of you, keep shining. Don't shrink. Keep going. And we're rooting you on. Mwah. Don't forget to hit subscribe so I can keep getting you weekly content to grow your business that is relevant, authentic, and effective, so you can get out there and shine your light and be the messenger that you're here to be, because your clients are waiting for you.